I spent my nights cleaning the desks of a corporate empire until a billionaire begged me to pose as his wife for a single night of silence. I should have kept my head down, but the folder he tried to hide revealed an organized scheme so dangerous that within hours I was running for my life. The fluorescent lights of the corporate tower always hummed at a frequency that seemed to vibrate directly against my skull. I was invisible. That was the point. For 3 years, I had spent my nights scrubbing the marble floors of Sterling Holdings, keeping my head down and making sure the mahogany desks in the executive suites didn't hold a single fingerprint. I was Maya, the night shift cleaner, a ghost in a gray uniform. That was until Arthur Sterling stepped out of his corner office at 2 a.m., looking less like a titan of industry and more like a man facing a firing squad. He didn't look at me. He looked at the reflection of the hallway in the glass, his tie loosened, his eyes bloodshot. "You," he muttered, not even bothering to learn my name. "You're the quiet one, aren't you? The one who never says a word, never gossips, never even looks up." I froze, my mop dripping onto the polished floor. "Yes, sir. I need a favor," he said, turning to face me. The desperation in his gaze was palpable, vibrating with the same intensity as the building's lighting. "And it's a favor that will change your life. You can keep scrubbing floors for minimum wage until your back gives out, or you can play a role for one night that pays more than your salary for the next decade." My heart hammered against my ribs. I should have walked away. I should have clicked my heels and headed to the basement break room. But the rent was 3 months late, and the eviction notice tucked under my pillow at home felt like a ticking bomb. I listened. The proposition was absurd, almost cinematic. Sterling was about to close a massive merger with a group of investors who were as dangerous as they were influential. They were old-school, traditional men who believed that a CEO's stability was reflected in his family life. His real wife had walked out on him 3 days ago, leaving him exposed and vulnerable. He needed a wife to stand by his side at the gala tonight, a woman who could be silent, poised, and utterly forgettable. "I have the clothes, the history, the backstory," he whispered, stepping closer. "All you have to do is smile, nod, and drink the champagne. If you pull this off, the money is yours. If you fail, well, I'll make sure you never find work in this city again." The transformation was frantic. By 6 p.m., I was wearing a silk gown that cost more than my car, my hair pulled back into an elegant chignon, my face painted by professionals who treated me like a mannequin. I didn't recognize the woman in the mirror. I looked cold, detached, and wealthy. I looked like I belonged in the room where the decisions were made. We arrived at the gala, a sprawling estate on the cliffside, filled with the kind of people who looked like they owned the ground they stood on. Arthur held my hand with a grip so tight it bordered on bruising. "Don't speak unless asked," he hissed under his breath. "And keep your eyes down. They're watching for anything that feels off." The night went surprisingly well. I played the part perfectly, a silent trophy bride. The drinks were expensive, the music was soft, and the investors seemed satisfied with Sterling's domestic stability. But then, as the clock struck midnight, one of the primary investors, a man with eyes as sharp as glass, approached us. He didn't look at Arthur. He locked his gaze onto mine, smiling in a way that made my skin crawl. "Mr. Sterling," the man said, his voice a low gravel, "you've done well for yourself. But tell me, why does your wife look so familiar to me? I believe I've seen her before, not in a ballroom, but somewhere much, much lower. Perhaps a service elevator?" Arthur's grip on my hand tightened until I thought the bones might snap. The air in the room seemed to vanish. I looked up. meeting the investor's predatory gaze, and felt my entire world tilt. It wasn't just a mistake. He knew. And as he reached into his jacket pocket, pulling out a folder that hadn't been there a second before, I realized that this wasn't just a business merger. Arthur wasn't protecting his career. He was hiding a secret that would bury us both. He leaned in and whispered, "Run." The command was so sudden, so devoid of its usual polished corporate rhythm, that for a split second, I didn't move. My silk heels felt glued to the parquet floor. Then Arthur shoved me, not with malice, but with a desperate, frantic urgency, into the shadow of a velvet curtain. "Don't look back," he hissed, his face drained of color. "Go to the east exit, the black sedan. The driver knows what to do." I didn't ask questions. The way the investor's eyes had shifted from cold curiosity to a chilling, predatory focus was enough. As I slipped through the crowd, I caught a glimpse of the folder he had produced. It wasn't full of contracts or financial statements. It contained photographs, grainy black and white stills taken from the security cameras at Sterling Holdings. They were images of me, not as a socialite, but as a cleaner, mop in hand, standing in the restricted archive room where I'd been told, months ago, never to look. My pulse was a frantic bird trapped in my chest. I pushed through the glass doors leading to the terrace, the cool night air biting at my exposed shoulders. My heart hammered as I raced toward the parking lot. The transition from the opulent ballroom to the dark, gravel-lined driveway felt like falling through a crack in reality. I saw the black sedan, its engine idling, a single plume of exhaust curling into the damp air. I scrambled inside, slamming the door shut. The driver didn't speak. He just locked the doors and peeled away, the tires spitting gravel against the stone pillars. I looked in the side mirror, expecting to see security guards or the investor chasing us. But the driveway was empty. It was too quiet. "Where is Arthur?" I gasped, my voice shaking. The driver ignored me, his eyes fixed on the rearview mirror. He was scanning the road behind us with the practiced vigilance of someone accustomed to being followed. It was then that I noticed the small, blinking light on the dashboard, a frequency scanner. It was pinging rhythmically, a steady, ominous sound that meant we were being tracked. "He isn't coming," the driver said finally, his voice flat. "He's the distraction. You have the drive, don't you? The one from the archive room?" My stomach plummeted. I remembered the night I'd found the small flash drive hidden inside a hollowed-out baseboard in the archives. I hadn't even looked at it. I had kept it as leverage, a small insurance policy for a woman who felt invisible. I had slipped it into the lining of my gown before the gala, a nervous habit that had suddenly turned into a death sentence. I don't know what you're talking about," I lied, my voice cracking. The driver laughed, a hollow, humorless sound. "Don't play the part now, Maya. The game is over. That drive contains the keys to a criminal network that has been operating out of Sterling Holdings for a decade. It's not just money. It's evidence of an organized scheme that would make even the most hardened criminal blush. The people you were standing next to tonight, they aren't investors. They're the ones who have been using Arthur to move prohibited cargo across state lines. And right now, they think you're the one holding the evidence that brings the whole house of cards down." He pulled the car onto a secluded dirt road, cutting the headlights. The sudden darkness was absolute. My hands flew to my side, feeling for the cold, hard lump of the drive hidden in the hem of my dress. He was right. "Why are you helping me?" I whispered, looking at his profile in the faint glow of the dashboard. "I'm not helping you," he replied, finally turning to look at me. His face was obscured by shadow, but the metallic glint of an object in his hand was unmistakable. It wasn't a weapon. It was a burner phone. I'm the internal cleanup crew. The service internal security team has been monitoring you since the moment you picked up that drive. They don't want the evidence to disappear, and they certainly don't want you to survive to tell the tale. He shoved the phone into my lap. The bridge ahead is wired to blow in 60 seconds. If you want to live, you jump when I slow down. If you stay in this car, you're part of the collateral damage. Before I could process the words, a blinding set of high beams appeared behind us, catching us in their glare. A heavy armored vehicle pulled alongside, forcing us toward the edge of the embankment. The driver slammed on the brakes, the car skidding, and I felt the gravity shift as we teetered over the precipice. Just as the car lurched forward, I saw a black SUV pull up, and a man stepped out. Not an investor, but someone I recognized from the lobby of my own apartment complex. He raised a piece of illegal equipment, aiming it directly at my window. The driver screamed, "Jump!" But as I reached for the door handle, the car doors locked automatically. The glass around us began to spiderweb under the force of incoming fire, and the bridge began to collapse beneath us. The world turned into a deafening symphony of screeching metal and shattering safety glass. As the car bucked, caught between the sheer gravity of the ravine and the relentless fire from the armored SUV, the internal locks clicked open. Not by the driver's command, but by the impact. I didn't think. I threw myself through the passenger door, hitting the wet dirt of the embankment just as the vehicle groaned, tipped, and tumbled into the abyss. The explosion that followed was a muffled roar, a fireball that illuminated the night sky like a dying star. I rolled into the tall, thick grass, my gown shredded, my hands raw and bleeding. I was alive, but the weight in my dress hem felt like a lead brick. I scrambled into the dense tree line, the sound of the pursuers' heavy boots crunching on the gravel above. They weren't looking for survivors. They were looking for the drive. I remembered the burner phone the driver had tossed into my lap. I pulled it from my pocket, the screen flickering to life. It didn't have a contact list, only a single pre-programmed number labeled internal security. I didn't call the police. I knew who the police worked for in this city. I called the number. "Speak!" A voice rasped on the other end, cold, mechanical, and utterly devoid of empathy. "I have the drive," I whispered, shivering, my back pressed against the rough bark of a pine tree. "And I know exactly who you are. You're not the law. You're the reason the law doesn't exist." There was a pause and then a faint, mocking chuckle. "You're a clever girl, Maya, but you're in no position to negotiate. Leave the drive at the base of the bridge and vanish. We'll make sure your life remains unburdened." "I'm not leaving it," I said, my voice hardening. "I already uploaded the contents to a cloud server that triggers a public release the second I stop checking in. If I die, or if I'm captured, every journalist from here to the coast gets the entire organized scheme, the names, and the shipping manifests for the prohibited items. Your whole network burns." It was a lie, of course. I had no idea how to do that, but I sounded like I did. The silence on the other end stretched, heavy and suffocating. I heard a whistle blow in the distance. The men were closing in. I started running. I ran until my lungs felt like they were filled with broken glass, moving through the forest with the desperate strength of someone who had nothing left to lose. I reached the highway 3 miles later, flagging down a passing long-haul trucker. I didn't tell him the truth. I told him I was a runaway fleeing an abusive situation. He didn't ask questions. He just turned up the radio, his eyes fixed on the road, and drove. For the next 6 months, I was a ghost. I moved from city to city, working under aliases, always looking over my shoulder. But I kept my promise. I spent every spare penny on security experts, real ethical hackers, who helped me extract the data from that drive. When we finally broke the encryption, it was worse than I imagined. The investors weren't just moving prohibited items. They were funding a network that had compromised local officials at every level. I didn't go to the police. I sent the files to a consortium of investigative journalists and the Federal Oversight Commission. The fallout was beautiful. Within 48 hours, Sterling Holdings was raided. The headlines weren't about a corporate merger. They were about a massive organized scheme brought down by a nobody. Arthur Sterling was arrested at the airport trying to flee the country with a fake passport. The investor with the predatory eyes, the man who had hunted me on the bridge, was caught in a sting operation a week later. I sat in a small cafe in a different country, watching the news on a wall-mounted television. The reporter was discussing the unprecedented cleaning of the corporate ranks. I sipped my coffee, feeling the warm sun on my face for the first time in what felt like a lifetime. The suit, the gown, the forced glamour, it all felt like a fever dream. I touched the empty space in my bag where the drive had been. I was still a nobody. I still had to work to survive, and I still checked the locks on my door twice every night. But for the first time, I wasn't invisible. I was the one who had pulled the plug. And as I walked out into the busy street, I didn't look down at my feet. I walked with my head high, knowing that the ghosts of my past were finally buried, and for once, the future was mine to clean.